Well, I have a couple of readings to share with you before I get into my remarks. The first is from Reverend Forrest Church's 2001 essay, Universalism, a Theology for the 21st Century. Universalism is an exacting gospel. Taken seriously, no theology is more challenging, morally, spiritually, or intellectually. To love your enemy as yourself, to see your tears in another's eyes, to respect and even embrace an otherness other than merely to tolerate, or even worse, dismiss it. None of this comes naturally to us. We are weaned on the rational presumption that if two people disagree, only one can be right. This works better in mathematics than it does in theology. Universalism reminds us of that. Yet even to approximate the universalist ideal remains devilishly difficult in actual practice. Given the natural human tendency toward division, universalists run the constant temptation to backslide in their faith. One can lapse and become a bad or lazy universalist as effortlessly as others become ice cream social Presbyterians or nominal Catholics. The second reading is from Rachel Newman, who wrote in a collection of essays on Buddhism. Her essay was titled, Not Quite Nirvana. Given the way human brains have been set up to discern and edit, listening without judgment is impossible. Instead, I am working on listening without immediately acting on or giving much weight to the judgment that occurs. It's useful to acknowledge the judgments I'm making all the time. Then I can see where they come from. Sometimes I look and decide I'm right on this. This or that person or idea is a wanker. Other times, usually 2 minutes too late, I realize all my righteousness is coming from my own fear or anger or craving, and I'm deeply embarrassed. I believe Chuck has a hymn for us now.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine.
That was an excellent choice, Chuck. It reminds me that when I did this service at MSUS, we did a children's story, and it was a book about a song. So I think there is something about music that touches, well, hopefully the universalist principle. So I've been thinking about universalism a lot for years, but really started to dig into it and read about it more in the last year. And Well, one of the things I've concluded is that I would find it so much easier to be universalist if it weren't for other people. You know, if my faith didn't keep challenging me to see the worth, the dignity, the humanity with all its potential and all of its frailty in everybody. Donald Trump, the Taliban, Kyle Rittenhouse, Derek Chauvin, white supremacists, anti-vaxxers, murderers, rapists, the people behind the opioid epidemic, Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, with the list, I mean, it doesn't end. There are a lot of people I am very angry with. And so universalism would be a whole lot easier to live out if it weren't so damned universal. I mean, universalism is a big, beautiful theology. It is a theology of hope and connection. But the trouble with big, beautiful ideas is that while we like to hold them up and look at them, we can be afraid to get them dirty, muddy them up with too much reality. And look, faith needs big ideas. Those ideas challenge us to consider what is most important to us and why. They give us a framework for shaping and reshaping values and meaning. But theoretical, poetic theology is not enough. Theology needs a place in the world, in our real lives. Or as an old Zen saying puts it, words don't cook rice. So I guess what I'm been trying to figure out is if universalism can boil water. I think it can. But the how is a challenge for me. Or at least putting it into words is. If universalism is going to cook rice, it needs to incorporate two potentially conflicting notions. One, that everyone has inherent worth and dignity and should be welcome in the human family, human community. And two, a lot of people do things that make it hard to see their worth and dignity. I have some ideas about how to connect these two notions. I'm not sure they're good ones. I'm not sure they cover everything. Life is way too messy, too complicated for that. But I think I can give us a place to start, at least, a foundation for bringing our universalist faith to just about any situation, or really, more importantly, any person. Universalism is rooted in love. Love for everyone, even people we really, really, really don't like. And for that to work, we need to reconsider what we mean by love. UU Minister Kate Braestrup, who serves as the minister to the game wardens in the state of Maine and has written a number of books, she wrote one of her books is on the question of what we mean by love and its application in the real world. And in it, she shared a definition I believe can fuel a practical universalist theology. She defined love this way: to earnestly desire the achievement of wholeness by the beloved. To earnestly desire the achievement of wholeness by the beloved. Which, if we're being universalist about it, is everyone. Note that it does not say to give the gift of wholeness to the beloved, or to impose wholeness on the beloved, or to make the beloved whole. As Braestrup writes, love doesn't require us to be friends with everyone. Love really has just one absolute, implacable demand. And to desire the achievement of wholeness by the beloved is not the same thing as being able to assist in that achievement, let alone impose it. Whether any particular person, any particular beloved achieves wholeness is not up to us, at least not entirely. It is not ours to give or to impose. It must be achieved by the beloved. Now, we can help create the circumstances that let them achieve it if they so choose. Or at least we can try not to get in the way. I'm not saying that loving people in this way means we have to put up with whatever they do. This is not a hippie, flower child, kumbaya sort of love. We're not just going to change the world by hugging people to make them feel better about themselves. I mean, for one thing, some of us aren't huggers. What I'm talking about is what I've heard some Buddhists call fierce compassion. Doing what must be done to protect ourselves and others without inflicting any more harm than is absolutely necessary. It is walking a line between allowing our compassion to enable bad behavior, what Buddhists might call idiot compassion, and striking out in anger or vengeance. Walking that line is not always easy. Years ago, I practiced the martial art Aikido. I was drawn to it because it is a purely defensive martial art. In its purest form, two Aikidoists who faced off in a match would do nothing. But in the face of an attack, Aikido trains the practitioner to control the attacker, to defend without causing injury, and when the attacker is no longer a threat, to walk away. Its founder taught that to injure an opponent is to injure yourself. To control aggression without inflicting injury is the art of peace. Aikido, it turned out, was a difficult art to learn, and perhaps ironically, or if I may be using that wrong, so maybe just poetically, Aikido has a higher rate of injury than most martial arts among its students. To love your enemy enough to counter them without harming them takes skill and work, and yeah, some degree of risk. It also teaches us that loving enemies does not mean conceding to them. As Brother David Steindl-Rast, the Benedictine monk who studied Zen Buddhism, has written, to love our enemies does not mean that we suddenly become their friends. If it is our enemies we are to love, they must remain enemies. Unless you have enemies, you cannot love them. By having convictions, we make ourselves the enemies of those who oppose those convictions. Loving an enemy is not at odds with holding on to our convictions. As Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg writes, practicing kindness doesn't at all mean that we will like everybody or acquiesce to everything that he or she does. It doesn't mean that we become complacent or passive about naming wrongdoing as wrong or about seeking change, sometimes very forcefully, with our whole heart. So, what do we do? Right? At this point, we're still in that big, beautiful theology idea. How do we love the difficult, the frustrating, the maddening, the disappointing, the hateful? Well, for starters, when you judge people, judge carefully. I'm not going to tell you not to judge because, as Rachel Newman wrote or told us in that reading this morning, that is impossible. Our brains literally won't let us not judge. But know that you are judging and think about where your judgment is coming from and what acting on it would do. What in your experience, in your story, is creating the preconceptions that are filtering your perceptions right now? Next, no matter how infuriating they are, never forget the other person's humanity. Like it or not, they are no more and no less human than we are, as monstrous as they may seem. Brother David suggests it may help to visualize your enemies as the children they once were. I have been trying, with mixed success, to stop calling someone who does terrible things a terrible person. It's a small idea maybe, but I want to make myself see that they are, more than anything, a whole person with facets that I do not see. A person who does terrible things can be a person who does beautiful things. But if I just call them a terrible person and label them that, well, a terrible person is just terrible. And then we're done. But if you can, Salzberg urges, pay full attention and really look at and listen to someone you usually ignore or find annoying, if you can be open to their story. I mean, we expect them to be open to ours, after all. Don't assume you know their story. If you can learn that story, great. But if you can't, then don't let yourself forget that you don't know it, and don't make one up. That is something, by profession, I'm a lawyer, and particularly in my family law cases, what I see is people filling in the other side's story. And they're usually wrong, because they're filling it in the worst possible light out of anger or frustration or fear. So if you can just know that you don't know the story, it is so much easier to consider your own judgment. And now, knowing the story, it may not make any difference, but it might. Part of my practice as a lawyer is mediation, a process that gives people in conflict a chance to hear from each other directly, to just tell the story of the conflict from their own perspective without all of the rules and procedures that we have to follow in court. Each party gets time to talk, and the other side is just asked to sit and listen. Now, it doesn't always work, but often the parties reach an agreement that ends their feud, or at least tamps it down for a while. And it's not at all uncommon for one party to say something like, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." When they didn't know the other person's story, they just made one up. And in most of the time, in their version, the other party was the villain, acting out of malice. If they let themselves hear the full story, that malice disappears. The thing I see most often is filling in a motive, assuming a motive. Now, sometimes that just doesn't pan out. Sometimes people really are out to get each other for some petty reason, or for terrible or hateful reasons, reasons that are hard to forgive. Open racism, blatant sexism, threats of violence, homophobia, transphobia, personal animus, the worst aspects of humanity crawled out from under the rocks in the last few years. The people embracing that hate and ignorance make universalism a challenge. I've read from pieces by many universalists struggling with the inherent worth and dignity after Trump got elected. So what does a modern universalist do with hate at that level? If I believed in God, it would be so much easier. I could let that higher, wiser power just figure it out. But I don't. At least I don't believe in a God in the sense of a conscious power that watches over this life and the next. I believe if there is anything like God, we create it by how we live together. God is love, but only if we make it that way. And I am a universalist because I refuse to give up on the possibility of that love, which still doesn't tell us how to deal with hate, how we make room in a universalist theology for hateful, even evil people. And I don't have a complete answer, but maybe a partial answer comes from Kate Braestrup's definition of love. We can desire that even these people trapped in hate will achieve wholeness. But even as we hope that for them, we have to know we can't give it to them or impose it on them. We cannot yell at them and expect them to change. We cannot tweet at them and expect them to become better people because we thought we were clever. But we also can't turn those limits into excuses for doing nothing or to cause more harm to the world by meeting their hate with our own. And it is so hard not to throw our anger back at them. At least it is for me. I want to mock and belittle them, insult them, and if I'm really honest, in some cases, I want to hurt them. I know in my mind and even in my heart that Thich Nhat Hanh is right in his words that open the service, that they are suffering, and that it is their suffering and pain that pushes them to pour more pain out into the world. Sometimes it's just so hard to care. But we should care. And if we can, we should let that caring guide our actions. Let them see us be open and loving, if not exactly forgiving. Support and respect and love the people they hate. Smile. Sing, dance, or just look at these rage-filled people, shake our heads, and walk away. Sometimes that's all we can do. It may not have the immediate visceral satisfaction of screaming back at them or kicking them in the shins, but that does show them that there's another way to live, and it leaves that way open to them. And in the end, I think that open door is the core of universalism. Professor Loretta Ross, a Black feminist survivor of sexual assault who has toured the country with a reformed member of the Aryan Nation and sat across the table from men convicted of rape to share her story and listen to theirs, remembers the lesson she learned from a civil rights leader decades ago. When you ask people to give up hate, you have to be there for them when they do. That, perhaps more than anything, is what it means to be a universalist. To allow reconciliation. To be there. To not give up hope on any human being, even knowing that they may never choose to live in that hope. As the hymn goes, ours is no caravan of despair. So may it be.
Thank you, Chad. We'll have a moment of silent meditation before we have a few minutes for congregational reflection. Again, thank you, Chad. And does anybody have anything they'd like to say?
I do.
Great.
First of all, thank you very much. I have been struggling with this for the past 2 years. Somewhat be more, before that, but you've couched it in a different way that makes it a little bit easier for me to see a path to actually maybe achieve at least part of that goal. Before I was just like, I can't do it. So thank you very much. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this again.
I will tell you, I still frequently have those I can't do it moments. And I just keep trying to come back to these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I also like what you said about if it's a God, it's something that we make together. And it's very profound. I like that.
The one that the part that got to me was making up stories. I do that a lot, and I do it when I can exonerate someone. But when I can't do it, that's the hardest part. And And so that's the part that I need to work on, is when I can't make up a story and say, why are they doing what they're doing? But the whole point, I guess, is that you have to accept without making up a story.
Yeah, you raise an interesting aspect of that. There is a lot of psychological neuroscience on the idea of tribes and how we will make up a story that exonerates people in our tribe, and we will make up stories that place more blame on people who are outside our tribe. And so I hadn't really thought about that aspect of it as I was writing it, but there are people we will be more, even if they're not in our tribe, that we as Universalists, liberals, may be more sympathetic to, that we might give credit to where we shouldn't. And fierce compassion would teach us you are compassionate by holding people responsible for their actions and not making up. So I hadn't thought about it that way, but it plays both ways.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd rather make the mistake of giving people the benefit of the doubt. So
I heard a Universalist, I think it was a Universalist Christian, who believed in salvation for everybody, and when challenged on, well, why do all these bad people deserve salvation, and he said, well, God is a love and pure light, transcendent beyond what we can understand. And he said, if it was up to me, I'd damn a lot of people to hell. And so I always think about that. And in a trivial kind of situational judgment scenario, I've taken the practice of when I see somebody who is acting like a jerk in traffic, I'll assume that he overslept and he's late for his job interview, or his wife, or the hospital called and his wife is in the hospital, or something like that. I'll make an assumption that he's not usually like this. So I try to do that anyway. I'll make up a story on the positive side instead of just reacting to the negative side.
I try to remember I have been that jerk in my time. I mean, I was probably 17 at the time, but some of the stuff I did in cars is I would have strong words for in adulthood.
So when we create stories, it's just a story. And we are not being with the what so of what happened. When we create story around something, we make it up. It's not true. And if we just go back to what exactly happened and stay with it can be called the what so. What so is what happened. And then we fill in all kinds of details to make it sense for ourselves. And that's what could get us in trouble.
And I think I took as little science as I could get away with to get my college degree, so take anything I say about science with a grain of salt. But I've done a lot of reading on the neuroscience of that, and I think we do that, and what I've observed and what studies are showing is once we fill in those things that aren't the what so, we're convinced they're real.
Absolutely. We can.
And then pulling people off of them that's a lot of the fight over vaccination in this country. People have filled in a story, and facts be damned. They just, and that's I don't want to just condemn the people on who I would regard as conservative on that. Liberals will do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
because we're all human beings and it's what our brains do.
Right.
Yeah, that's, thanks for all your messages, Chad. This was very timely. This is something that I too have been struggling with, with a couple people, but one that should be very important in my life, but is not. So it's really hard. It's really, really hard. So, so I've been going to a few people to sort of help me with that. But this was a really good perspective, a different way of looking at it, as Deb said. But I'd like you to say a little bit more about the, I think you said ours is no caravan of despair. Was that the end of that?
Yes.
Can you say a little more about that?
That is, is Sufi, I think it's Rumi.
Yeah, it is.
I always get the name mixed up with the guy who does the kids songs, so I'm always worried I'm going to get it wrong.
Raffi.
Rumi, he was a Sufi mystic, and I've actually read something that we have mistranslated over the years, the poem that comes from, and stripped out some of the Islam from it, which is unfortunate. But it is a hymn that we do at MSUS frequently.
We used to do it too a lot when we met in person, but that's probably why you haven't heard it.
Come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is
no caravan of despair.
Come, yet again, come. Yes.
Right.
And I've seen the other more full translations, and it definitely ties much more into the theology and into God or Allah in the original. It's still beautiful. And it just, I think modern Universalists would have less comfort with it, which is a thing that I keep trying to prod modern Unitarian Universalists on. But it is the idea behind the reason that it grafts me so much is despair is easier to fall. It's so easy to fall into because there are so many reasons, and to have a faith that pushes that off is difficult, but it is empowering. And what drives a theology of universalism to me is a mix, fundamentally love, but the prospect of joy through pain and togetherness, and knowing that pain exists, but it is not all there is. And so I think any faith that is worth having can cling to this idea that we are not a caravan of despair. We will go through the world in hope and in love. And we'll do it together, because
I just looked up
almost impossible.
The line that we never sing is, even though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, come whoever you are.
Yes. I was going to mention that.
I just posted it in the chat.
Yes, that's the one that I found that I want to build a whole sermon around at some point. Thank you.
I actually recorded myself doing the 4 lines that are in the book, but adding that line, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times. I'm looking for the recording. I can't find it right now, but
and that, I think, gets to the heart of what the way I'm describing universalism is that we're always here. We will not give up on you. Yeah, and I hope that's true. Yeah, but if Derek Chauvin got out of prison and came to my church, I don't know how true it would be in practice. But I want to be the person who welcomes him if he's looking for that opportunity and his.
Well, if he comes to your church, Yes, take him in hand and be there when he wants to change. Yes.
I think that's the right thing. I don't think it's likely to happen, but
You never know. You don't. It depends on what he learned and did his through this have a realization.
right. I mean, in that moment that things were happening, that he was killing George Floyd, Derek Chauvin was the hero of his story.
Yeah.
And because we all are. And so can he change that perspective to realize, and this is an easy thing for me to think about because I'm a comic book geek, and villains become heroes all the time in those books after they realize what they've done. Real people can do it too, I think. In fact, I know they can, because you see lots of stories about white supremacists who walk away. I mean, the Loretta Ross that I mentioned toured for years with a reformed white supremacist who realized, and she was there to see the fullness of his humanity and the complexity of his story.
And then just look at reading whatever was in the paper about Rittenhouse and some of the stuff, but talking about someone living the hero story in his own mind.
I mean, he's 17. He's deeply wrapped up, or was at the time. Yeah. Of course he was wrapped up in that. A 17-year-old boy in heavily toxic male culture. I mean, what he did, whether it's forgivable or not, I'm not qualified to answer that, but it's understandable.
Yeah. Well, then you get in the whole realm of when multiple people have guns.
Right.
Who's the first showing aggression and who's playing the defensive?
Yeah, there's a whole culture problem there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even you mentioned about how do you pronounce it? Aikido.
Aikido.
That so many people get injured trying to not injure the aggressor. So yeah, that there's just layers and layers of complexity on this. And I appreciated everything that you said, and I loved the ideas about, picturing this person who does terrible things as a child. That has been helpful, except that a lot of people, want to punish children for misbehavior and think that they're naughty and that they're sinful, and they just haven't even learned how to behave because we haven't taught them how to behave. And then they grow up to be people that still don't know how to behave and hurt people. But the one thing that hasn't been said, I guess, today, but I loved everything that has been said, is that when we make up these stories, a lot of times, and forgive me because I love Fred Rogers, but one of the things he said is that we do make up these stories about people, but when you get to know their true story, you can't help but love them. And so that I kind of keep that in my mind a lot. And the other part is that if we really desire this wholeness of people who are in our minds broken, other sermons have taught how it's the breaks that let the light shine in. And so we all have to, in some ways, heal our brokenness, and that's where the light can shine in, I hope. I don't know if that makes sense, but I really loved all of this discussion today. We have time maybe for one more, if there's any more comments.
Well, I've always believed that love is unconditional. And we make moral judgments about people and their actions when really it was just the act. It was the what so again.
Right.
And then we make judgments about that when we meet someone who is that we deem unlovable, that's how it's going to be for us. And when one thing we can do is look for the gold nugget in that person. Dig deep until you find it and hang on to that, because we can at least recognize them for being born and for being imperfect.
Indeed. Well, thank you, everybody. I think maybe we should close with the closing words that Kathy printed out in the chat. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come even if you have broken your vow 1,000 times. Come yet, again come. Come. Okay.
Amen.